The bonfire crackled and spit sparks into the warm July night as I wandered through Pine Lake Resort, calling Ryan's name into the darkness. Laughter drifted from the main lodge where my extended family was still celebrating the second night of our annual reunion. But my husband had vanished without a word over an hour ago. I checked his favorite spot by the dock, the game room, even the resort bar where Uncle Tony was holding court with his fishing stories. Nothing. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. That's when I heard it. A soft giggle that made my blood freeze. My sister Chloe's laugh, floating from the direction of the old boathouse that sat hidden behind a grove of pine trees. But it wasn't just her laugh that stopped me cold. It was the low murmur of a man's voice responding. Intimate and familiar. A voice I'd been listening to for 6 years of marriage. I crept closer, my sandals silent on the pine needles carpeting the forest floor. Through the dusty window of the abandoned boathouse I saw them. Ryan, my husband of 6 years, had his hands tangled in my sister's long dark hair, while she pressed against him like they'd done this 1,000 times before. The moonlight streaming through the broken slats illuminated their faces perfectly, and there was no mistaking what I was witnessing. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a drunken mistake. This was practiced. This was intimate. This was devastating. The Martinez family reunion had been a tradition for over 20 years, but this year felt different from the moment we pulled into Pine Lake Resort's gravel parking lot. Maybe it was the way Chloe had insisted on riding with us instead of driving herself from Charlotte, spending the entire 3-hour trip from Atlanta making pointed comments about how cozy Ryan and I looked together after all these years. Or maybe it was the strange energy I'd been feeling between my husband and my younger sister for months now. A tension I couldn't quite name but couldn't ignore either. Ryan had been distant lately, working late more often, taking calls in the other room, checking his phone obsessively when he thought I wasn't looking. When I'd ask about it, he'd brush me off with vague mentions of a demanding client or a complicated case at his law firm. I'd wanted to believe him, because the alternative, the possibility that was now crystallizing in that moonlit boathouse, was too horrible to consider. The reunion officially started Friday afternoon, with the traditional arrival barbecue. Carlos, my cousin who organized these gatherings every year, had outdone himself with the decorations. Red, white, and blue bunting hung from every available surface of the main lodge, and the smell of his famous dry-rubbed ribs filled the mountain air. Pine Lake stretched out before us like a mirror, reflecting the Blue Ridge Mountains that surrounded our little slice of paradise. I'd been looking forward to this weekend for months. Work had been brutal lately, with the advertising agency where I served as creative director demanding 60-hour weeks to land a major automotive account. Ryan's law practice had been equally demanding, or so he claimed. This reunion represented our first real break together in over 6 months, and I'd foolishly thought it might help us reconnect. The first sign that something was wrong came during Friday night's welcome dinner. Our family had rented the entire lodge, with sleeping arrangements in the scattered cabins that dotted the property. Ryan and I were staying in cabin 7, a rustic but comfortable 2-bedroom overlooking the lake. Chloe had specifically requested cabin 12, which happened to be the closest one to ours, despite the fact that she could have stayed with our parents in the larger cabin 3. During dinner, I noticed how often Ryan's attention drifted to wherever Chloe was sitting. When she got up to refill her wine glass, his eyes followed her movement across the room. When she laughed at something Uncle Tony said, Ryan smiled like he was sharing a private joke. When she complained about the air conditioning in her cabin being too loud, Ryan immediately offered to take a look at it after dinner. "You're handy with mechanical things," Mom said approvingly, always quick to praise any man who showed initiative around household problems. "Natalie's lucky to have someone so helpful." "Oh, Ryan's always been good with his hands," Chloe said, and something in her tone made my stomach tighten. There was an undertone there, something that sounded almost like innuendo, but when I looked at her face, she was smiling innocently at our mother. Ryan excused himself to check Chloe's air conditioning while I helped clear the dinner dishes, a task that took nearly an hour with our large extended family. When he returned, his hair was slightly messed and there was a flush to his cheeks that he attributed to the stuffy cabin air. Chloe appeared a few minutes later, her own face glowing, and her tank top slightly askew, claiming the unit was working perfectly now. Saturday morning brought the annual softball game, a tradition that had evolved over the years into a competitive event, complete with team jerseys and an actual trophy. Ryan and I had always been on the same team, the Lake Lions, but this year Chloe maneuvered to switch from her usual team to ours, claiming she wanted to finally be on a winning side. Besides, she said, playfully bumping Ryan's shoulder as we divvied up positions, I've been working. I think I could really contribute this year. She wasn't lying about the working out. My sister had always been beautiful, but over the past year she'd transformed herself into something approaching perfection. Her dark hair fell in waves past her shoulders, and her body had the kind of toned curves that made other women secretly hate themselves. At 28, she was 4 years younger than me, and seemed to glow with the kind of effortless vitality that I remembered having before marriage and career stress had worn me down. During the game, I watched Ryan watch. When she bent over to tie her cleats, his eyes lingered on the curve of her back. When she stretched before batting, he found excuses to stand nearby. When she hit a solid double and jogged around the bases, he cheered louder than he'd ever cheered for any of my athletic accomplishments. But it was the small moments that really got to me. The way he handed her a water bottle without being asked, the way he steadied her elbow when she stumbled slightly running to third base, the way she looked at him when she thought nobody was watching, with a hunger that made my chest tight with an emotion I didn't want to name. You're being paranoid, I told myself during the 7th inning stretch, when Ryan volunteered to help Chloe search for her lost earring in the grass behind home plate. They're family now, of course they're comfortable with each other. But the voice in my head wasn't convinced, and it grew louder when they took nearly 15 minutes to find an earring that mysteriously reappeared in Chloe's pocket moments after they returned from their search. The afternoon brought swimming and boat rides on the lake, activities that showcased Chloe's new figure in a barely there blue bikini that she claimed to have bought specifically for the reunion. She spent most of the time in the water with Ryan, splashing and playing like teenagers while I sat on the dock with my book watching them through my sunglasses and feeling like an outsider at my own family gathering. They seem to be getting along well, observed my mother, settling into the lawn chair beside me with a satisfied smile. Mom had always worried that Ryan didn't feel fully integrated into our large, boisterous family, so seeing him bond with Chloe probably looked like progress to her. I managed, not trusting my voice to say more. Chloe's been having such a hard time since her divorce, Mom continued, apparently oblivious to the tension radiating from my entire body. It's nice to see her laughing again, and Ryan's always been so good at making people feel welcome. Welcome, that was one way to put it. From my vantage point on the dock, I could see Ryan lifting Chloe onto his shoulders for a chicken fight against our cousins Derek and Stephanie. Her hands were tangled in his hair for balance, and she was laughing with the kind of genuine joy I hadn't seen from her in months. The sound carried across the water like music, pure and infectious. What bothered me most wasn't just their obvious comfort with each other, it was how natural it looked. How right. Like they'd been touching each other for years instead of just this weekend. Like they shared secrets I wasn't privy to. Like I was the outsider looking in on something that had been building for far longer than I'd realized. The day's events culminated with the traditional evening barbecue, where Carlos unveiled his latest creation, a whole pig that had been smoking since dawn. The extended family gathered around picnic tables that groaned under the weight of everyone's contributions. Aunt Maria's famous cornbread, Cousin Lisa's 7-layer salad, and enough desserts to feed a small army. I'd brought my specialty, a bourbon peach cobbler that usually earned rave reviews, but tonight I could barely taste my own creation. Ryan was sitting diagonally across from me, close enough that I could have reached out and touched his hand, but he might as well have been on another planet. His attention was completely focused on Chloe, who was regaling the table with stories from her job as a nurse at Charlotte Memorial Hospital. So there I was, she said, gesturing dramatically with her fork, covered in mysterious bodily fluids, trying to explain to this patient's wife why her husband was unconscious and speaking only in Portuguese, when I don't speak a word of Portuguese myself. Ryan laughed like it was the funniest story he'd ever heard, even though I'd heard Chloe tell this exact same story at Christmas dinner 6 months ago. The laugh was different too, deeper, and more intimate than his usual polite chuckle. It was the laugh he used to save for me, back when we first started dating, and everything I said seemed witty and charming. "You handle crisis situations so well," he said, and there was genuine admiration in his voice. "It takes a special kind of person to think clearly under that kind of pressure." Chloe practically glowed under his praise, and I felt something cold and hard settle in my stomach. This wasn't just casual flirtation or innocent family bonding. This was my husband, the man who'd promised to love and honor me above all others, looking at my sister like she hung the moon and stars. The conversation continued around me, but I found myself studying their body language instead of listening to their words. The way Chloe leaned slightly toward Ryan when she spoke, the way his hand rested on the table just inches from hers, the way they seemed to communicate with glances and half smiles that excluded everyone else at the table. "Natalie, honey, you're awfully quiet tonight," observed Patricia, Ryan's mother, who'd driven down from Virginia for the reunion. "Are you feeling all right?" "Just tired," I said, forcing a smile. "It's been a long week at work." "You work too hard," Chloe said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand in a gesture that would have seemed sisterly and supportive if I hadn't noticed how her eyes never left Ryan's face while she touched me. "You need to learn to relax and enjoy life more." "Some of us have responsibilities," I replied, and immediately regretted the sharp edge in my voice. The table went quiet for a moment, and I could feel everyone's eyes on me. "Of course you do," Chloe said smoothly, her voice dripping with understanding. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But they were too lost in each other to notice anything beyond their bubble of stolen intimacy. I made it halfway back to the main path before my knees gave out entirely, and I found myself sitting on a fallen log in the darkness, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. 6 years of marriage, 6 years of building a life together, of shared dreams and mutual compromises, and the thousand small intimacies that create a partnership. 6 years of believing that whatever problems we had, whatever distance had grown between us, we would work through it together because that's what marriage meant. All of it destroyed by my sister's laugh floating through the mountain air and my husband's hands in her hair. The worst part wasn't just the betrayal, though that cut deep enough to leave scars. The worst part was how right they'd looked together, how natural, how happy. Sitting there in the darkness, I had to confront the possibility that what I'd just witnessed wasn't a temporary lapse in judgment, but the revelation of something that had been building for months, maybe years. How long had they been looking at each other across family dinner tables while I remained oblivious? How many phone calls and text messages had they exchanged while I worked late at the office? How many times had Ryan claimed to be working late while he was actually with her? The questions multiplied in my mind like cancer cells, each one more painful than the last. Every family gathering took on new meaning. Every time Chloe had visited us in Atlanta, every business trip Ryan had taken that required him to drive through Charlotte, where she lived. I sat on that log until my legs went numb, and the sounds from the fire pit grew distant and sporadic as people began heading to their cabins for the night. When I finally forced myself to stand and walk back toward the lodge, I felt like a different person than the one who'd started that evening. The naive, trusting wife who'd been worried about work stress and communication problems was gone, replaced by someone harder and more calculating. By the time I reached our cabin, Ryan was already back, lying in bed with his eyes closed and that same fake sleep breathing pattern he'd used the night before. This time, I didn't lie awake wondering where his mind was. I knew exactly where it was, and with whom. As I changed into my pajamas and brushed my teeth, moving through the familiar routines of married life, I was already beginning to plan. Because if Ryan and Chloe thought they could conduct their affair right under my nose and get away with it, they had seriously underestimated the woman they'd chosen to betray. The old Natalie might have confronted them immediately, tears streaming down her face as she demanded explanations and apology. She might have made a scene at the family reunion, destroying the weekend for everyone, and giving them the perfect excuse to paint her as the unstable, jealous wife who couldn't handle the truth. But the new Natalie, the one born in that moment of witnessing their intimate betrayal, had different plans entirely. If they wanted to play games, I would show them exactly what happened when they underestimated a woman who had finally seen the truth. Monday morning arrived with the cruel cheerfulness that only comes after a night of devastating revelations. The mountain air was crisp and clean, birds chirped in the pine trees surrounding our cabin, and sunlight streamed through the windows like nothing had fundamentally shifted in my universe. Ryan stirred beside me, stretching and yawning with the easy comfort of a man who believed his secrets were still safe. "Morning, beautiful," he murmured, leaning over to kiss my forehead with the same casual affection he'd shown me for 6 years. The touch that used to warm me now felt like ice against my skin. "Morning," I managed, forcing myself not to flinch away from his lips. If I was going to uncover the full extent of their betrayal, I needed to maintain the facade of the trusting wife for a little while longer. Ryan rolled out of bed and padded toward the bathroom, completely oblivious to the fact that his entire world was about to crumble. As the shower started running, I lay still and stared at the ceiling, my mind racing with plans and possibilities. The old Natalie would have packed her bags and left immediately, too hurt and humiliated to think strategically, but something had crystallized in me during those dark hours after witnessing their embrace. I wasn't just going to leave, I was going to make sure they understood exactly what they'd destroyed and what it was going to cost them. The final morning of the reunion traditionally involved a leisurely breakfast, followed by the dreaded packing and goodbye ritual. Most families would trickle out throughout the day, with promises to stay in better touch, and threats to make next year's reunion even bigger and better. It should have been bittersweet, the natural conclusion to a wonderful weekend of family bonding. Instead, it felt like preparation for war. I dressed carefully that morning, choosing a sundress that Ryan had always said was his favorite. If I was going to play the role of the loving wife, I might as well look the part. When he emerged from the shower, hair still damp and eyes bright with what I now recognized as post-adultery glow, he smiled approvingly at my outfit. "You look amazing," he said, wrapping his arms around me from behind as I stood at the mirror applying mascara. "I love you in that dress." The words that should have made me happy now felt like acid in my ears. How could he stand there, fresh from planning secret rendezvous with my sister, and tell me he loved anything about me? How could he touch me with the same hands that had been tangled in Chloe's hair just hours before? "Thank you," I said, proud of how steady my voice sounded. "I thought we should look nice for the goodbye breakfast." What I didn't tell him was that I'd chosen this particular dress for strategic reason. It was the same one I'd worn to our rehearsal dinner 6 years ago, when his parents had toasted our upcoming marriage, and my family had welcomed him with open arms. If anyone was going to remember that detail later, it would add another layer of poetic justice to what I was planning. The lodge dining room was already buzzing with activity when we arrived, families claiming tables and loading plates from the breakfast buffet that Carlos had somehow managed to coordinate, despite his obvious hangover from the previous night's festivity. I spotted Chloe immediately, sitting with our parents and looking radiant, in a way that made my stomach clench with fresh anger. She'd always been beautiful, but this morning she practically glowed. Her dark hair fell in perfect waves around her shoulders. Her skin had the kind of luminous quality that comes from being thoroughly satisfied, and she was smiling with a secret contentment that made me want to scream. This was how she looked after spending intimate moments with my husband, and she was sitting at a table with our mother, accepting compliments on how rested and happy she appeared. "Chloe looks wonderful this morning," Ryan observed as we approached their table, and there was something in his tone that confirmed my worst suspicions. This wasn't casual observation. This was a man admiring his lover while pretending to make innocent conversation with his wife. "She certainly does," I agreed, settling into the chair directly across from her. "You're practically glowing, sis. The mountain air must agree with you." Chloe's cheeks flushed slightly, but her smile never wavered. "I slept so well last night. Sometimes fresh air and a change of scenery is exactly what you need to feel like yourself again." The double meaning in her words was so obvious it was almost insulting. She was sitting there making coded references to her affair with my husband, while our parents nodded approvingly and complimented her on her healthy appearance. The audacity was breathtaking. "It's amazing what a good night can do for you," Ryan added, and I caught the meaningful look that passed between them. Brief, but unmistakable. They were communicating right in front of me, sharing their secret satisfaction while I sat there playing the oblivious wife. Ryan had trouble sleeping, I said conversationally, watching both their faces carefully. He was restless, kept getting up and moving around. It was a lie, but I wanted to see how they'd react to the suggestion that their secret meeting might have been witnessed. Chloe's hand tightened almost imperceptibly around her coffee cup, while Ryan's jaw tensed for just a moment before he recovered his composure. I went for a walk, he said casually. Sometimes I need to clear my head before bed. A walk where the question slipped out before I could stop it, sharper than I'd intended. Just around the property, down to the lake and back. Why? The lie came so easily that I realized this wasn't new for him. Ryan had always been good at thinking on his feet in court, but this kind of smooth deception suggested he'd had plenty of practice lately. How many other lies had he told me over the past months? How many late nights at the office were actually rendezvous with Chloe? No reason, I said, forcing a smile. I just worry when you can't sleep. Usually means you're stressed about something. Nothing to worry about, he said, reaching over to squeeze my hand in a gesture that would have looked supportive to anyone watching. Just needed some air. Breakfast continued with the usual family chaos. Cousins arguing over who got the last piece of bacon. Uncle Tony regaling everyone with detailed plans for next year's reunion, and my mother coordinating a complex logistics operation to ensure everyone's leftovers made it to the right cars. I participated in all of it, laughing at jokes and offering to help with cleanup, while internally cataloging every interaction between Ryan and Chloe. They were careful, I had to give them that. No obvious touches or lingering glances that might raise suspicion. But there was an awareness between them that hadn't been there at the beginning of the weekend, a magnetic pull that made them unconsciously orient toward each other even when they were talking to other people. It was the kind of intimate connection that develops between lovers. And now that I knew what to look for, it was impossible to miss. When Chloe mentioned that her car was making a strange noise, Ryan immediately offered to take a look before she drove back to Charlotte. When Ryan complained about a knot in his shoulder from sleeping on the unfamiliar mattress, Chloe suggested a pressure point technique she'd learned from a physical therapist at the hospital. Small offers of help that could have been innocent if not for the context I now possess. "You two are so sweet to take care of each other," Mom observed approvingly. "It's wonderful to see how close you've become." Close. If only she knew how close. The packing process gave me the perfect opportunity to start my investigation. While Ryan loaded our suitcases into the car, I volunteered to help strip the beds and gather any forgotten items from our cabin. What I was really doing was searching for evidence, though I wasn't entirely sure what I expected to find. Ryan's phone, which he'd left charging on the nightstand while he dealt with the luggage, proved to be more revealing than I'd dared hope. I'd never felt the need to check his phone before, trusting him completely and respecting his privacy. That trust now seemed laughably naive. His text messages told a story that made my blood run cold. Weeks of communication with Chloe that had started innocuous enough, but gradually became more intimate and secretive. Professional conversations about her job stress that evolved into personal confessions about feeling lonely since her divorce. Sympathetic responses from Ryan that crossed the line from brotherly concern to something much more dangerous. The progression was sickeningly clear when laid out in chronological order. First came the increased frequency of their conversations, texting daily instead of the occasional family check-ins that had been their previous pattern. Then came the shift to more personal topics, with Chloe sharing details about her failed marriage, and Ryan offering support that became increasingly emotionally intimate. The real smoking gun was buried 3 weeks back in their conversation history. A message from Chloe that simply said, "I can't stop thinking about you," followed by Ryan's response, "Me neither. We need to talk in person." The subsequent messages were arrangements for a meeting in a coffee shop halfway between Atlanta and Charlotte, justified as Ryan helping Chloe with some legal advice about her divorce settlement. How had I missed this? The coffee shop meeting would have required Ryan to drive nearly 2 hours each way, yet I had no memory of him being gone for an entire afternoon. I scrolled further back through his calendar app and found the answer. He'd scheduled the meeting for a Saturday when I was attending a mandatory work retreat in Savannah. I'd been in team-building exercises and strategy sessions while my husband was falling in love with my sister in a roadside diner. The messages after that meeting left no doubt about what had transpired. "Today changed everything," Chloe had written. "I know," Ryan replied, "but we have to be careful. Give me time to figure this out." Figure what out? How to leave me, how to manage the family fallout, how to conduct their affair without getting caught. Each possibility was more devastating than the last. I found evidence of 2 more secret meetings over the following weeks, both carefully scheduled around my work commitments and disguised as innocent family obligations. A chance encounter at a restaurant when Chloe was supposedly visiting a friend in Atlanta. A brief stop to check on her when Ryan claimed to be meeting a client in Charlotte. Lies stacked upon lies, creating a foundation of deception that supported their growing relationship. The most recent messages, sent just yesterday during the reunion, were the hardest to read. "Can't wait for tonight," from Chloe. "Meeting you there changed everything," from Ryan. "I love you," from both of them. The words I'd been waiting months to hear from my husband again, but directed at my sister instead of me. I screenshotted the most damning conversations, my hands shaking as I sent them to my own phone. The evidence was overwhelming, but I needed documentation that couldn't be deleted or denied. When confronted, Ryan would undoubtedly claim the messages were taken out of context, or that I'd misunderstood their meaning. But screenshots don't lie, and the progression from friendly family support to declarations of love was impossible to explain away. The sound of Ryan's footsteps on the cabin's front porch sent me scrambling to replace his phone exactly where I'd found it. By the time he walked through the bedroom door, I was innocently folding the last of our towels, my heart hammering so loudly I was sure he could hear it. "Cards all loaded," he said, seemingly oblivious to my internal chaos. "You about ready to hit the road?" "Almost," I managed. "Just want to make sure we didn't forget anything." What I'd forgotten, I realized, was how to breathe normally. The evidence on his phone had confirmed my worst fears and then exceeded them. This wasn't a recent attraction or a moment of weakness that might be forgiven and overcome. This was a full-blown emotional affair that had been building for weeks, complete with secret meetings and declarations of love. The goodbye process at the lodge felt like a cruel farce. Family members exchanged hugs and promises to stay in touch, everyone already making plans for next year's reunion. I watched Chloe hug Ryan goodbye, noting how their embrace lasted just a beat too long, and how her hand lingered on his back in a way that looked territorial rather than sisterly. "Drive safe," she murmured to him, loud enough for others to hear but with an undertone that suggested deeper meaning. "You too," he replied. "Take care of yourself." The casual words of farewell were loaded with subtext that only I could decode. They were saying goodbye to their lover, not their brother-in-law and sister-in-law. The family members surrounding us had no idea they were witnessing the temporary separation of 2 people who'd rather be leaving together. When Chloe hugged me, I forced myself not to pull away, despite every instinct screaming that I was embracing my betrayer. Her perfume, the same vanilla and jasmine scent she'd worn since high school, would forever smell like treachery to me now. "Thanks for such a wonderful weekend," she said, squeezing me tightly. "I feel so much closer to the family now." The innocent words took on sinister meaning when delivered by someone who'd been conducting an affair with my husband for the past 24 hours. She was thanking me for providing the perfect cover for their romantic getaway, for being so trusting and oblivious that they'd been able to carry on right under my nose. "I'm so glad," I replied, proud of how genuine my smile looked. "Family is everything, isn't it?" If she caught the edge in my voice, she didn't show it. Instead, she gave me one more squeeze, before climbing into her car and driving away, leaving me standing in the parking lot with the husband who'd just spent the weekend falling deeper in love with her. The 3-hour drive back to Atlanta passed in a strange bubble of false normalcy. Ryan chatted about work deadlines and upcoming social obligations, making plans that assumed our marriage would continue unchanged. He suggested we try that new Italian restaurant downtown, mentioned that his parents had invited us for dinner next weekend, and asked if I wanted to plan a fall vacation somewhere with good hiking. All of it felt surreal, like watching someone rearrange deck chairs on the Titanic. He was making plans for our future while actively dismantling our present, apparently believing he could manage both relationships simultaneously until he figured out how to transition from one to the other. "You're quiet," he observed as we crossed into the Atlanta city limits. "Everything okay?" "Just tired," I said. The same excuse I'd been using all weekend. "It was a lot of family time." "Yeah, but good family time," he said, and there was something in his tone that made my skin crawl. "I feel like I really connected with everyone this weekend, especially Chloe. She's been through so much with the divorce. I'm glad she has family support." Family support? Was that what we were calling it now? "She did seem happier than she's been in months," I agreed. "Almost like a different person." "People bloom when they feel appreciated," Ryan said, and I caught the wistful note in his voice. "Sometimes all it takes is someone really seeing you. You know." The conversation felt like a confession disguised as casual observation. Ryan was telling me in coded language that he'd found something with Chloe that he felt was missing in our marriage. The tragedy was that he wasn't entirely wrong. We had grown distant over the past year, caught up in career pressures and the gradual erosion of intimacy that affects many marriages. The difference was that I'd assumed we would work through it together, while he'd apparently decided to find what he needed elsewhere. Our house in Virginia Highland looked exactly the same as we'd left it 3 days earlier, but walking through the front door felt like entering a crime scene. Every room held memories that were now tainted by what I knew. The kitchen where Ryan had taken those mysterious phone calls that were probably Chloe. The living room where he'd claimed to be working late while probably texting her. The bedroom where I'd lain awake worried about his stress levels while he was falling in love with my sister. I unpacked our suitcases with mechanical efficiency while Ryan sorted through the mail and checked his work emails. Normal domestic routines that felt anything but normal when performed by a woman who'd just discovered her husband's affair. Every mundane task took on the weight of potential finality. Was this the last time I'd wash his clothes? The last time I'd organize our shared closet? The last time I'd pretend our marriage was salvageable? That evening, as Ryan settled in to watch a baseball game with the comfortable assumption that life would continue as usual, I retreated to my home office and began to plan. If he thought he could conduct an affair with my sister and manage the situation on his timeline, he was about to learn exactly how wrong he could be. The first step was gathering more evidence. The text messages were damning, but I needed a complete picture of their relationship. Bank records to see if he'd been spending money on hotels or restaurants during their secret meetings. Credit card statements to track unexplained charges. Phone records to document the frequency of their communication. I'd never been the suspicious wife, but 6 years of marriage had given me access to all our financial accounts and a general knowledge of Ryan's patterns and habits. It didn't take long to find the inconsistencies that I'd been too trusting to notice before. A hotel charge in Charlotte from the weekend he'd claimed to be meeting a client. Dinner for two at an expensive restaurant on a night when he'd told me he was working late. Frequent stops at a florist near his office, despite the fact that he hadn't brought me flowers in months. The evidence painted a picture of a man courting someone, but that someone definitely wasn't his wife. The more I dug, the angrier I became. Not just at the affair itself, but at the calculated deception it required. Ryan hadn't just fallen in love with my sister. He'd systematically lied to me for weeks, creating elaborate fictions to cover his tracks while I remained completely oblivious. Every business trip, every late night at the office, every weekend plan that conveniently took him through Charlotte became suspect. How long had this been going on? The text messages only went back 6 weeks, but that didn't mean the attraction hadn't been building for months before that. I thought back to family gatherings over the past year, looking for signs I'd missed. Chloe's increased interest in our lives in Atlanta. Ryan's enthusiasm for family events that he'd previously found tedious. The way they'd started texting more frequently after her divorce was finalized 8 months ago. 8 months. Had I been the fool wife for 8 months while they built a relationship right under my nose? The possibility made me physically ill, but it also crystallized my resolve. If they thought they could manipulate me indefinitely while they figured out their next move, They were about to discover they'd severely underestimated their opponent. The second step was protecting myself financially. I'd always been independently successful in my career, but marriage had made me complacent about maintaining complete financial autonomy. We had joint accounts, shared credit cards, and financial plans that assumed we'd be together for the next 40 years. If Ryan was planning to leave me for Chloe, I needed to ensure I wasn't left financially vulnerable during the transition. I spent hours that night quietly transferring money to accounts that were solely in my name, documenting assets we'd acquired during our marriage, and researching the divorce laws in Georgia. If Ryan wanted out of our marriage, he was welcome to leave, but he was going to pay fair market value for the privilege, and he was going to do it with full knowledge of exactly what he was throwing away. The third step was the most emotionally difficult but strategically crucial. I needed to maintain the facade of normalcy, while I gathered more evidence and prepared for the confrontation that was coming. That meant pretending I didn't know about their affair, acting like the trusting wife while secretly documenting every lie he told me. It was exhausting work, requiring me to compartmentalize my emotions, while playing a role that became more painful every day. Ryan would mention Chloe casually in conversation, and I'd have to respond with appropriate sisterly interest instead of the rage that was building inside me. He'd make plans for our future while probably texting her about theirs. He'd touch me with the same hands that had held her, and I'd have to pretend I didn't want to scrub my skin raw afterward. But I was learning things during this performance that I never would have discovered through immediate confrontation, like the fact that Ryan was already making plans to spend more time in Charlotte for business development purposes, or that he'd been researching relationship counselors, probably trying to decide whether our marriage was worth salvaging or if he should just leave me for Chloe outright. The most revealing discovery came when I found him researching apartment rentals in Charlotte, supposedly for a client who was relocating. When I asked about it over dinner, he explained it smoothly and convincingly, but the search history on his computer told a different story. He wasn't looking for client recommendations. He was exploring the possibility of moving to be closer to my sister. Each discovery felt like another nail in the coffin of our marriage, but it also strengthened my resolve. Ryan was planning his escape route while I remained ignorant and trusting. He was going to abandon our 6-year marriage for an affair with my sister, and he was probably planning to let me down easy with some garbage about growing apart and wanting different things. But I wasn't going to make it that simple for him. If Ryan wanted Chloe, he could have her. But first, he was going to face the consequences of his choices in front of everyone who mattered to both of us. Just like they'd conducted their affair under the noses of our families, their relationship was going to be exposed in the most public and humiliating way possible. Because sometimes, when people destroy your life, the best revenge is simply letting everyone see exactly who they really are. The morning I decided to hire a private investigator, Ryan was humming in the shower. The sound drifted through our bathroom door like a knife twisting in an open wound. He'd been inexplicably cheerful for the past week since our return from the reunion, practically bouncing around our house with the energy of a man who'd found new purpose in life. Every smile felt like a slap in the face, every casual touch like a betrayal of everything I thought I knew about our marriage. I sat at my vanity, applying mascara with hands that had finally stopped shaking, and listened to him sing off-key verses of some country song about new beginning. The irony wasn't lost on me. Ryan was celebrating his fresh start with my sister while I was planning the systematic destruction of everything he thought he could control. The private investigator came recommended through a colleague at my advertising agency who'd recently gone through her own messy divorce. Marcus Webb had the kind of unremarkable appearance that probably served him well in his profession. Average height and build with forgettable features that wouldn't stand out in a crowd, but his reputation for thoroughness and discretion was exactly what I needed. His office in Buckhead was Spartanly professional, just a desk, 2 chairs and filing cabinets that probably contained the secrets of half of Atlanta's elite. When I explained what I needed, Marcus listened without judgment, taking notes in a leather portfolio that looked like it had seen plenty of similar consultations. "How long do you suspect this has been going on?" he asked, his voice neutral and businesslike. "Based on what I've found, at least 6 weeks, but I think it might be longer. Much longer. And you want photographic evidence of their meetings? I want everything. Photos, documentation of where they go and how long they stay. Phone records if you can get them legally. Financial evidence of money he's spending on her. I want a complete picture of their relationship. Marcus nodded, making more notes. What's your timeline for this information? As soon as possible. I have reason to believe he's planning to leave me, and I want to be prepared when that happens. Most people in your situation want to confront immediately, Marcus observed. You seem unusually composed for someone who just discovered their spouse's affair. I met his gaze steadily. I'm not most people, and this isn't just any affair. It's with my sister, at my family reunion, after 6 years of marriage. When I confront them, I want to be absolutely certain I have all the facts. What I didn't tell Marcus was that composure had become my armor. Every day I spent playing the oblivious wife while secretly building my case made me stronger and more determined. Ryan thought he was managing the situation, gradually working toward some perfect moment to reveal his true feelings, and transition smoothly from our marriage to his relationship with Chloe, but he had no idea that his timeline had just become irrelevant. The waiting was the hardest part. Marcus warned me that gathering comprehensive evidence would take time, probably several weeks of surveillance and investigation. During that period, I had to continue living with Ryan, sharing meals and conversations and a bed, all while knowing he was planning to abandon our life together for my sister. Ryan made it easier than it should have been by becoming increasingly distant and distracted. He spent more time on his phone, took more calls in private, and developed a sudden interest in working late several nights a week. When I asked about his increased workload, he explained it away with vague references to a complex case that required evening research and client consultation. The lies came so smoothly now that I wondered if he'd always been this good at deception, or if the affair had simply given him more practice. Either way, watching him fabricate explanations for his absence became a masterclass in recognizing manipulation tactics I'd been blind to before. 3 weeks into Marcus's investigation, I received my first batch of photographic evidence that confirmed everything I suspected and more. The images were date-stamped and professionally clear, documenting a pattern of secret meetings that had been going on for nearly 3 months, not 6 weeks as I'd originally estimated. The photos told a story that was somehow worse than I'd imagined. Ryan and Chloe weren't just having an affair, they were building a full relationship, complete with romantic dinners, weekend getaways, and the kind of intimate gestures that suggested deep emotional connection. In one image, taken outside a bed and breakfast in the North Georgia mountains, Chloe was laughing at something Ryan had said while he looked at her with the expression of a man completely besotted. I'd never seen him look at me that way, not even during our honeymoon. The timeline Marcus had reconstructed was devastating in its thoroughness. Their first documented meeting was at a coffee shop in Macon, exactly halfway between Atlanta and Charlotte, 3 months ago. From there, their encounters had become increasingly frequent and elaborate. Weekend trips when I thought Ryan was attending legal conferences, romantic dinners when he claimed to be working late, even a jewelry store visit, where he'd purchased a necklace I'd never seen him give to anyone. There's more, Marcus said when he delivered the initial report to my office. Your husband has been looking at real estate in Charlotte, not just online browsing. He's met with agents, toured apartments, and put in an application for a 2-bedroom place in the Myers Park area. The information hit me like a physical blow. Ryan wasn't just having an affair with my sister. He was planning to move to her city, probably expecting to gradually transition from our marriage to their relationship with minimal drama. In his mind, he was probably being considerate, working out all the details before dropping the bombshell on his unsuspecting wife. How soon? I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. The apartment application is contingent on a start date of next month. He's told them he'll be relocating for work, expanding his practice to include North Carolina clients. Next month, Ryan was planning to leave me in 4 weeks, and I was probably supposed to remain ignorant till he'd already secured his escape route. The timeline explained his recent cheerfulness and his increased attention to personal grooming. He wasn't just conducting an affair anymore. He was preparing for his new life. There's something else, Marcus continued, consulting his notes. Your sister has been apartment hunting too. Same timeline, same general area. Looks like they're planning to live separately initially, probably to avoid immediate family suspicion, but the locations are close enough to suggest coordination. Of course they were coordinated. Chloe had always been a planner, And Ryan was nothing if not methodical in his approach to major life changes. They'd probably mapped out their entire future together, figuring out how to manage the family fallout and minimize the disruption to their professional life. Everything except how to handle the wife they were betraying. That evening, I sat across from Ryan at our dining room table, sharing a dinner of takeout Thai food while he told me about his day with the same casual intimacy we'd maintained for 6 years. He asked about my projects at work, complained about a difficult client, and suggested we plan a weekend trip to Savannah sometime soon. The entire conversation felt like performance art, two people playing the roles of happily married couple while one of them secretly planned their escape and the other documented every lie for future legal proceeding. I found myself studying his face as he spoke, memorizing details I'd somehow stopped noticing over the years. The way his left eye crinkled slightly when he smiled, the habit he had of running his fingers through his hair when he was thinking, the laugh he used when he was genuinely amused, versus the one he deployed for social situations. All of it was about to become memory. In 4 weeks, Ryan would be gone, and these mundane domestic moments would be impossible to recreate. The realization should have been devastating, but instead it felt oddly liberating. I was finally seeing our marriage clearly without the filter of false hope or willful blindness. "You seem different lately," Ryan observed, refilling my wine glass with the kind of attentive gesture that had once made me feel cherished. "More, I don't know, focused I guess. Work's been intense," I said, which wasn't entirely a lie. Big presentation coming up that could determine the direction of my career, also not entirely a lie, though the presentation I was preparing wasn't for my job. It was for the moment when I would lay out the complete evidence of his betrayal in front of everyone who mattered to both of us. "Anything I can help with?" he asked, and the offer sounded sincere. Ryan had always been supportive of my career, attending work events and celebrating my successes with genuine enthusiasm. It was one of the qualities that had made me fall in love with him 6 years ago. The tragedy of discovering someone's affair isn't just learning that they've betrayed you, it's realizing that all the good qualities you loved about them are still there, now being offered to someone else. Ryan was still charming and supportive and attentive. He just wasn't those things for me anymore. "I think I need to handle this one on my own," I said, "but thank you for offering." The next phase of my plan required careful timing and even more careful coordination. Marcus had provided me with Ryan's schedule for the following month, compiled through a combination of surveillance and information gleaned from his office calendar. The pattern was clear. Every Thursday evening Ryan drove to Charlotte for what he'd told his law partners was business development, but was actually his standing date with my sister. Those Thursday absences had been happening for 6 weeks, disguised as necessary networking and client cultivation in an expanding market. Ryan would leave Atlanta around 5, spend the evening and night with Chloe and return Friday afternoon with stories about productive meetings and promising leads. His law partners probably thought he was a dedicated professional expanding their practice into North Carolina. They had no idea he was systematically destroying his marriage instead. But this Thursday was going to be different. This Thursday I was going to be in Charlotte too. I'd arranged everything with the precision of a military operation. A last-minute business trip to meet with a potential client, documented through my assistant and approved by my creative director. Hotel reservations at the same boutique property where Ryan had been staying during his romantic getaways. Booked under my maiden name to avoid any possibility of accidentally alerting him to my presence. A rental car reserved at the Charlotte airport instead of driving my own recognizable vehicle. The plan was simple in concept, but required flawless execution. I would document their evening together with my own photographs, gathering additional evidence while also confirming the details Marcus had provided. But more importantly, I would finally see their relationship with my own eyes, watching how they interacted when they thought they were completely unobserved. The flight from Atlanta to Charlotte took 43 minutes, barely enough time to process what I was about to witness. I'd never followed my husband before, never felt the need to verify his whereabouts or question his explanations. The woman boarding that plane was someone I barely recognized, harder and more calculating than the trusting wife who'd packed for a family reunion just weeks earlier. Charlotte's airport was busy with Thursday evening business travelers, providing perfect cover for someone who needed to blend into the crowd. I collected my rental car and drove to the hotel with hands that were steady on the steering wheel, despite the chaos in my mind. In 2 hours, I would watch my husband with my sister, seeing their relationship from the perspective of an observer, rather than a victim. The boutique hotel was exactly the kind of place Ryan would choose for a romantic getaway. Historic charm combined with modern luxury, located in the heart of Charlotte's Arts District with easy access to galleries, restaurants, and the kind of cultural attractions that would appeal to two people building a relationship. I'd stayed in similar places with Ryan during our own romantic trips in the early years of our marriage. The irony of him recreating those experiences with my sister wasn't lost on me. I checked into my room under the name Martinez, using my maiden name and a credit card Ryan had never seen. The clerk, a young woman with purple hair and multiple piercings, was efficiently professional, handing me key cards and providing directions to the elevator without showing any interest in my presence. Perfect anonymity for someone who needed to remain invisible. My room was 3 floors above the one Marcus had identified as Ryan's usual accommodation. From my window, I had a clear view of the hotel's entrance and the valet parking area where Ryan would arrive with my sister for their romantic evening. The surveillance equipment Marcus had lent me was already set up on the desk, professional-grade camera with telephoto lens and sound recording capability that would document everything clearly enough for legal proceedings. At 7:15, exactly when Marcus's intelligence had predicted, a familiar silver BMW pulled into the hotel's circular drive. Ryan stepped out first, walking around to open the passenger door with the kind of chivalrous gesture he'd once reserved for me. When Chloe emerged from the car, she was wearing a red dress I'd never seen before, something elegant and fitted that made her look like she was attending a special celebration. She probably was. Based on the timeline of their relationship and Ryan's apartment hunting, tonight might be when he finally told her about his plans to move to Charlotte. This could be their celebration dinner, marking the transition from secret affair to acknowledged relationship. I watched through the camera lens as Ryan handed his keys to the valet with the easy confidence of someone who'd done this many times before. Chloe linked her arm through his as they walked toward the hotel entrance, her face tilted up toward his, with the kind of adoring expression that used to make me feel grateful for my marriage. Now it just made me feel They moved together with the synchronicity of an established couple, Ryan's hand finding the small of Chloe's back as he guided her through the revolving door. The gesture was so natural, so obviously practiced, that it confirmed everything Marcus had documented about the depth of their relationship. This wasn't just physical attraction or emotional support during a difficult time, they were genuinely in love. The realization should have destroyed me, but instead, it crystallized my resolve. Ryan wasn't leaving me for a meaningless fling or a midlife crisis. He was leaving me for someone he loved more than he'd ever loved me. The least I could do was make sure he paid full price for that choice. I followed them through the hotel's public spaces, maintaining careful distance while documenting their evening with Marcus's professional equipment. They had dinner at the hotel's rooftop restaurant, sharing appetizers and laughing over private jokes like any couple celebrating a special occasion. Ryan ordered wine, something expensive judging by the sommelier's attention, and toasted with Chloe like they had significant news to share. From my table near the bar, positioned behind a decorative column that provided perfect concealment, I could see everything clearly through the camera's display screen. Ryan looked happier than I'd seen him in months, his entire face animated with the energy of someone who'd found exactly what he'd been missing. Chloe was equally radiant, glowing with the satisfaction of a woman who'd captured the attention of someone she genuinely wanted. They were perfect together in a way that made my chest tight with grief and fury. Not just physically, though they certainly complemented each other beautifully, but in their mannerisms and conversation pattern. Ryan leaned forward when Chloe spoke, hanging on every word like she was sharing state secrets. She touched his arm when she laughed, natural and comfortable in a way that suggested months of practice. The hardest part was recognizing how natural their connection appeared. This wasn't the awkward fumbling of a new affair or the desperate passion of people stealing forbidden moments. They looked like they belonged together, like they'd been a couple for years instead of months. After dinner, they walked through the hotel's lobby toward the elevator bank, Ryan's arm around Chloe's waist in a gesture of casual possession. I gave them a 5-minute head start before following, using the stairs to reach the floor where Marcus had confirmed Ryan's room was located. The hallway was empty and carpeted, muffling my footsteps as I positioned myself near the ice machine with a clear view of room 4. What happened next was somehow both expected and shocked. Through the partially open door, I could hear their voices clearly, intimate and relaxed like lovers who'd been together for years instead of months. Chloe was laughing about something that had happened at the hospital, while Ryan was apparently opening champagne based on the distinctive sound of a cork popping. "To us," Ryan said, his voice carrying clearly through the thin hotel walls. "To finally being together," Chloe replied. "No more secrets, no more sneaking around." The words hit me like physical blows. They were celebrating the end of their secret affair, probably because Ryan had finally worked up the courage to ask for a divorce. Tonight was their victory celebration, marking the beginning of their acknowledged relationship and the end of the marriage he'd been planning to abandon. I documented everything with Marcus's equipment, gathering audio evidence that would prove premeditation and eliminate any possibility of Ryan claiming this was a recent development or temporary lapse in judgment. Their conversation revealed planning that went back months, coordination of their separate apartment searches, and excitement about Ryan's upcoming move to Charlotte. "I can't believe you're really doing this," Chloe said. "Moving here, starting over, choosing us instead of staying in a marriage that wasn't making you happy." "It was never really a choice," Ryan replied. "Not after I fell in love with you. I just needed time to figure out how to do it right, how to minimize the damage to everyone involved." Minimize the damage. Ryan thought he was being considerate by planning his escape route before abandoning his wife. In his mind, he was probably the good guy in this story, someone who'd fallen genuinely in love and was handling the situation as responsibly as possible. But he'd forgotten one crucial element in his careful planning. He'd forgotten that his wife might not be the passive victim he expected her to be. He'd forgotten that some people, when betrayed completely, don't just accept their fate quietly. Sometimes they fight back. And sometimes, when they fight back, they win. I left Charlotte that night with more evidence than I'd ever need to prove Ryan's affair and his intention to abandon our marriage. But more importantly, I left with absolute certainty about what needed to happen next. Ryan and Chloe thought they'd managed their situation perfectly, transitioning from secret affair to acknowledged relationship with minimal disruption to their plans. They were about to learn exactly how wrong they could be. The flight back to Atlanta gave me 2 hours to finalize the details of what would happen next. Ryan's timeline called for him to ask for a divorce next week, probably with some gentle explanation about growing apart and wanting different things. He'd present it as a mutual recognition that their marriage had run its course, making it easier for both families to accept the inevitable separation. But Ryan's timeline was about to become irrelevant, because next week at the dinner party I was already planning, he and Chloe were going to discover what happened when they underestimated a woman who'd finally seen the truth about her marriage and decided to take control of her own story. The dinner party invitation went out on a Tuesday morning, sent through elegant cream-colored cards I'd had printed at the same stationery shop where we'd ordered our wedding invitations 6 years ago. The irony wasn't accidental. If Ryan and Chloe wanted to destroy the life I'd built, they were going to do it in the same venue where it had begun. "Mr. and Mrs. Ryan Brooks request the pleasure of your company for an intimate dinner, celebrating family and new beginnings." The invitation read. "Saturday evening, 7 o'clock, black tie optional, RSVP required." I'd crafted every word carefully, choosing phrases that would sound innocent to most recipients, but would carry special significance for the two people who knew what new beginnings really meant. Ryan, still blissfully unaware that I knew about his affair, had enthusiastically supported the idea when I suggested hosting a dinner party. "It's been too long since we entertained," he'd said, already mentally calculating how this gathering might provide the perfect opportunity to begin preparing our families for the changes he was planning to announce. "Who should we invite?" "Everyone who matters to us," I'd reply. "Both our families, our closest friends, the people who've been part of our journey together." The guest list was strategic in its inclusiveness. My parents, who'd welcomed Ryan into our family with open arms and still considered him the ideal son-in-law. His parents, who'd always been slightly reserved toward me but had grown genuinely fond of our relationship over the years. Our siblings, including Chloe, who would receive her invitation with no idea that it was actually a summons to her own reckoning. Close friends from work and college who'd witnessed our relationship from the beginning, and would serve as the perfect audience for what was about to unfold. 24 people total, all of whom had played significant roles in our life together and would therefore have front row seats to watch it end. The symmetry was perfect, requiring everyone who'd celebrated our marriage to witness its destruction at the hands of the two people they'd trusted most. Ryan threw himself into party planning with enthusiasm that might have been touching if I hadn't known he was secretly viewing this as his farewell performance. He suggested menu items that had been favorites at our previous dinner parties, recommended wines that would pair perfectly with each course, and even offered to handle the flower arrangements himself. "I want everything to be perfect," he said, and there was genuine emotion in his voice. "This feels like an important evening, you know, like we're marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of something new." He had no idea how right he was. I'd hired the same catering company that had handled our wedding reception, another detail that added layers of meaning to the evening. Chef Marcel and his team arrived Saturday afternoon to transform our dining room into something approaching perfection. The table was set with our finest china, crystal stemware that caught the light from the chandelier Ryan's parents had given us as a wedding gift, and centerpieces of white roses and eucalyptus that reminded me of my bridal bouquet. Everything about the evening was designed to evoke memories of happier times, creating the perfect contrast for the devastation that was about to unfold. If Ryan and Chloe had spent months planning their future together, I'd spent weeks planning their perfect exposure. The evidence Marcus had gathered was organized in a leather portfolio that sat hidden in my home office, waiting for the exact right moment to make its appearance. Photographs documenting 3 months of secret meetings, hotel receipts, showing Ryan's regular Thursday night stays in Charlotte, text message screenshots revealing the progression from family friendship to passionate affair, and audio recordings from their celebration dinner where they'd toasted the end of their secrecy. But the most damning evidence wasn't in the portfolio. It was in the email I'd discovered just 2 days earlier, sent from Ryan's personal account to his law firm's managing partner, a formal request to open a satellite office in Charlotte, complete with business projections and a proposed timeline that would have him relocated within 6 weeks. Ryan had been planning his escape for months, methodically arranging every detail while I remained completely oblivious. The dinner party would mark the end of his deception and the beginning of consequences he'd never imagined. Guests began arriving at 7 o'clock sharp, each couple or family group welcomed into our home with the same warm hospitality we'd always shown. My parents arrived first, my mother immediately gravitating toward the kitchen to offer help that Chef Marcel politely declined. My father, looking distinguished in his best suit, complimented the table settings and asked about the wine selection with the enthusiasm of someone who appreciated good dinner parties. Ryan's parents followed shortly after, Patricia elegant in navy blue silk and James wearing the same conservative black suit he'd worn to our wedding. They'd always been more formal than my family, but tonight their stiffness seemed to carry undertones of anticipation, as if they sensed something significant was about to happen. Our friends filled the house with the comfortable chatter of people who'd known each other for years. Sarah and Tom from my advertising agency, who'd been guests at our wedding and had celebrated every anniversary since. Marcus and Jennifer from Ryan's law firm who'd become close friends through countless work events and social gatherings. College friends who'd witnessed our early relationship and had always considered us one of the success stories from our group. Each arrival brought the same warm greetings and genuine pleasure at being included in what everyone assumed was simply another of our legendary dinner parties. The house filled with laughter and conversation, wine glasses clinked in toasts to friendship and family, and the atmosphere buzzed with the energy of people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Chloe arrived fashionably late, making an entrance that commanded attention from everyone in the room. She wore a black cocktail dress that hugged her curves perfectly, her dark hair styled in loose waves that caught the light when she moved. She looked stunning in the way that only women who know they're desired can look, confident and radiant with the inner glow of someone whose romantic life was finally falling into place. "Natalie, darling, everything looks absolutely perfect," she said, embracing me with what appeared to be genuine sisterly affection. "You always throw the most elegant parties." "Thank you," I replied, returning her hug with matching warmth. "I wanted tonight to be special, a celebration of all the relationships that matter most to us." Ryan appeared at my elbow with a glass of champagne for Chloe, his attention immediately focused on her in a way that would have been obvious to anyone who knew what to look for. But our guests saw only a thoughtful brother-in-law making sure his sister-in-law had everything she needed, the perfect cover for lovers who'd mastered the art of hiding in plain sight. "You look beautiful tonight," Ryan said to Chloe, his voice carrying undertones that I now recognized as intimate rather than familial. "You clean up pretty well yourself," she replied, her smile containing secrets that only the two of them shared. I watched their interaction with the detached fascination of an anthropologist studying mating rituals. Every gesture, every glance, every carefully casual touch told the story of their affair to anyone who understood the language they were speaking. But to our families and friends, they simply looked like two people who'd grown comfortable with each other through years of family gathering. Dinner was announced at 8 o'clock and guests moved into our dining room with the appreciative murmurs that always accompanied Chef Marcel's presentation. The table looked like something from a magazine, elegant place settings reflecting the warm glow of candlelight while the scent of herb-crusted lamb and roasted vegetables filled the air. I'd assigned seats with the precision of a chess master, positioning Ryan and Chloe where their behavior would be most visible to the largest number of guests, while ensuring they felt comfortable enough to let their guard down. Ryan sat at one end of the table in his traditional host position, while I took my place at the opposite end. Chloe was positioned near Ryan's right side, close enough for meaningful glances but far enough away to maintain the appearance of propriety. The first course passed with the usual dinner party conversation, guests catching up on work and family news while complimenting the food and wine selection. Ryan played his role perfectly, attentive to everyone's needs, while maintaining the easy charm that had made him popular at social gatherings throughout our marriage. But I was watching for the subtle signs that revealed the truth beneath his performance. The way his attention kept drifting to Chloe even when other people were speaking to him, the slight smile that played around his lips when she laughed at someone else's joke, as if he was proud of her response. The unconscious way he oriented his body toward her position, even when engaged in conversation with guests on his other side. Chloe was equally revealing to anyone who knew how to read the signs. She participated in conversations with her usual vivacity, charming our friends with stories from her work at the hospital and asking thoughtful questions about their lives. But her real attention was focused on Ryan, monitoring his mood and reactions with the hyper-awareness of someone whose happiness depended on another person's emotional state. During the main course, the conversation turned to future plans and upcoming travel, providing the perfect opening for Ryan to begin laying groundwork for his eventual announcement. He mentioned increased business opportunities in North Carolina, casually floating the possibility of expanding his legal practice into new markets. "Charlotte's becoming such a hub for corporate growth," he said, cutting his lamb with the precise movements of someone who'd practiced this speed. "There's real potential for specialized legal services in that market." "Would that require you to travel more?" asked Marcus from his firm, clearly interested in the business implications. "Possibly," Ryan replied, glancing briefly at Chloe before continuing. "It might even make sense to establish a more permanent presence there eventually." The words were carefully chosen to sound like preliminary business exploration rather than concrete relocation plan. But I caught the look that passed between Ryan and Chloe, a moment of shared understanding that confirmed everything Marcus had discovered about their coordinated apartment hunting and Ryan's secret timeline. "That sounds exciting," my mother said, approving. "Growth opportunities are always worth pursuing, especially when you're young enough to take risks." If only she knew what risks her son-in-law was actually taking. The conversation continued through dessert and coffee, with Ryan skillfully steering discussions toward themes of new beginnings and positive change. He was masterfully preparing the ground for future revelations, creating a narrative framework that would make his eventual departure seem like natural career evolution, rather than abandonment of his marriage. Chloe supported his performance with perfectly timed comments about the benefits of embracing change and the importance of following opportunities wherever they led. To casual observers, she simply sounded like a supportive sister-in-law encouraging her brother-in-law's professional ambition. But every word was carefully calculated to normalize the idea of Ryan relocating to her city. By 10 o'clock, the dinner portion of the evening was complete, and guests were settling into the living room with after-dinner drinks and the comfortable relaxation that follows an excellent meal. This was traditionally when our dinner parties became most intimate, with small group conversations and the kind of genuine connection that made these gatherings memorable. It was also the perfect time for the revelation that would destroy everything Ryan and Chloe thought they'd carefully manage. I excused myself briefly, ostensibly to check on the catering staff, but actually to retrieve the leather portfolio from my office. My hands were steady as I carried it back to the living room, though my heart was racing with anticipation of what was about to unfold. Ryan was standing near the fireplace, gesturing expansively, as he told a story about a recent court case that had apparently been both challenging and ultimately successful. He looked relaxed and confident, buoyed by the wine and the warm reception his hints about Charlotte had received. Chloe sat nearby on the sofa, her attention focused on him with the kind of rapt interest that went beyond polite social listening. "Actually," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the conversations that had been humming throughout the room, "I have something special to share with everyone tonight." The room gradually quieted as attention turned toward me, guests sensing that something significant was about to happen. Ryan smiled expectantly, probably assuming I was about to make some touching speech about the importance of family and friendship. Instead, I opened the leather portfolio and removed the first photograph, a crystal-clear image of Ryan and Chloe kissing in the doorway of the Charlotte Hotel. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway marking the second. "Since we're all here celebrating the relationships that matter most to us," I continued, my voice maintaining the same warm tone I'd used throughout dinner, "I thought you should see what my husband and my sister have been building together for the past 3 months. I held up the photograph high enough for everyone in the room to see clearly. Ryan's face went completely white, while Chloe's hand flew to her throat in a gesture of shock that would have been comical if the situation weren't so devastating. "That was taken last Thursday evening at the Morrison House Hotel in Charlotte," I explained conversationally, as if I were sharing vacation photos instead of evidence of adultery. "The same hotel where Ryan has been staying every week for the past 6 weeks, supposedly developing business contacts in North Carolina." The silence stretched taut as piano wire, nobody moving or speaking while they processed what they were seeing. Ryan opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, apparently unable to find words for a situation he'd never prepared for. "There are more," I said, removing additional photographs from the portfolio. 3 months worth, actual hotel receipts, restaurant charges, even audio recordings of them planning Ryan's move to Charlotte, so they can stop sneaking around. I set the evidence on the coffee table where everyone could see it clearly, spreading out photographs and documents like a prosecutor presenting a case to a jury. Each piece of evidence told part of the story, building an undeniable picture of a relationship that had been conducted entirely behind my back. "The apartment applications are particularly interesting," I continued, maintaining the same calm tone despite the chaos erupting in my chest. "Separate places in the same neighborhood, both with lease start dates next month. Very thoughtful planning for 2 people who are supposedly just family." Patricia Brooks made a strangled sound that might have been Ryan's name, while my mother's face crumpled with the kind of grief that comes from watching someone you love be publicly betrayed. My father's expression was harder to read, but the muscle jumping in his jaw suggested he was restraining himself from saying something that wouldn't help anyone. "Natalie," Ryan finally managed, his voice hoarse with shock. "This isn't—" "I understand perfectly," I replied, removing the final piece of evidence from the portfolio. "I understand that you've been planning to leave me for my sister, that you've been conducting an affair while living in our home and sharing our bed, and that you thought you could manage the situation on your timeline without me ever knowing the truth." The audio recording device was small but professional grade, designed to capture conversations with perfect clarity. When I pressed play, Ryan and Chloe's voices filled the living room with intimate confessions that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. To us, Ryan's recorded voice said clearly, "To finally being together, to no more secrets, no more sneaking around." Chloe's voice replied, "I can't believe you're really doing this. Moving here, starting over, choosing us instead of staying in a marriage that wasn't making you happy." The devastation on both their faces was almost worth the months of deception I'd endured. Ryan looked like he might physically collapse, while Chloe had gone so pale I thought she might actually faint. They sat frozen in their respective positions, unable to deny the evidence of their own voices celebrating the destruction of my marriage. I think, I said into the absolute silence that had fallen over the room, it's time for everyone to understand exactly what kind of people they've been celebrating tonight. The explosion of voices that followed was everything I'd hoped for. And Ryan's parents demanding explanations that he couldn't provide, my parents expressing the kind of outrage that comes from watching their daughter be publicly humiliated by people they'd trust, friends who'd believed in our marriage struggling to reconcile the evidence with the couple they thought they knew. But it was the look on Chloe's face that satisfied me most. Gone was the confident woman who'd been planning her new life with my husband. In her place sat someone who'd just realized that actions have consequences, that betraying family comes with a price that goes far beyond the temporary satisfaction of stolen romance. Ryan finally found his voice, but the words that emerged were weak and defensive rather than the smooth explanations he'd probably been rehearsing for months. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, he said, looking around the room desperately. We never meant to hurt anyone. We fell in love. You fell in love, I corrected, while lying to me every single day for 3 months. You fell in love while sharing my bed and making plans for our future. You fell in love while stealing money from our joint accounts to pay for hotel rooms and romantic dinners with my sister. The financial evidence was the final straw for several guests, transforming their shock into genuine anger. Using marital assets to fund an affair wasn't just emotionally devastating. It was a form of theft that added practical consequences to the emotional betrayal. How long? My mother asked, her voice breaking with the weight of her disappointment. How long has this been going on under our noses? 3 months of active meetings, I replied, consulting the timeline Marcus had prepared. But the emotional affair probably started much earlier. The text messages go back almost 6 months, beginning right after Chloe's divorce was finalized. The implication was clear to everyone in the room. While our family had been supporting Chloe through her difficult divorce, offering comfort and encouragement during her lowest moments, she'd been systematically seducing her sister's husband. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that even people who'd been prepared to offer understanding found themselves speechless with disgust. Chloe finally found her voice, but what emerged was the kind of desperate damage control that only made the situation worse. You don't understand how unhappy he was, she said, looking around the room for support that wasn't coming. Your marriage was already over, Natalie. We found something real together. The audacity of using my marriage's problems to justify her actions was breathtaking. Even if Ryan and I had been struggling, which we had been to some degree, that didn't give my sister license to seduce my husband instead of encouraging us to work through our difficult. My marriage might have had problems, I said, standing up to face her directly. But it also had potential for repair, until you decided my husband was something you wanted to steal. The room erupted again, this time with family members taking sides, and friends trying to process the complete destruction of relationships they'd assumed were solid. Ryan sat in the middle of it all, the architect of this disaster, watching his carefully managed situation spiral completely out of control. But I wasn't finished. The public exposure was satisfying, but it was only the first act of consequences that would reshape all our lives. Since you're both so eager to start your new life together, I announced, raising my voice above the chaos, I'm sure you'll be thrilled to know that I've already filed for divorce. Ryan, you'll be served with papers on Monday morning. I'm asking for everything Georgia law allows, including compensation for the marital assets you've been spending on your affair. The words hit the room like a physical force, silencing the arguments and reducing everyone to stunned observation. This wasn't just the revelation of an affair, it was the complete dismantling of a life that 24 people had gathered to celebrate. As for your apartment in Charlotte, I continued, consulting my notes with the clinical precision of someone who'd planned every detail, I've sent copies of all this evidence to your law firm's managing partner, along with documentation of your fraudulent business expansion proposal. Turns out they're not thrilled about partners using company resources to relocate for personal affairs. Ryan's career implosion was as swift and thorough as his marriage's destruction. By Monday morning, he'd be facing divorce proceedings, professional sanctions, and the complete loss of respect from everyone who'd believed in his integrity. But the final blow was reserved for Chloe, whose own professional life was about to become significantly more complicated. And since you work in healthcare, I said, turning to face my sister directly, I thought your hospital's administration should know about your extracurricular activity. Turns out they have very strict policies about staff members who engage in behavior that reflects poorly on their professional standard. The evidence of her affair, particularly the audio recordings where she discussed manipulating family relationships for personal gain, would be difficult to explain to hospital administrators who valued integrity and ethical behavior from their nursing staff. In less than 10 minutes, I'd destroyed both their careers, their reputations, and their carefully planned future together. The apartment applications would be meaningless when neither of them had jobs to support the rent. The romantic relationship that had seemed so perfect in secret would now have to survive the harsh light of public scrutiny and financial pressure. The dinner party ended with the kind of chaos that would be remembered for years. Guests fled our house with the uncomfortable urgency of people who'd witnessed something they wished they could forget. Family members left with promises to call later when emotions had cooled and rational conversation became possible. Ryan and Chloe departed separately, their coordinated escape plans ruined by the exposure of their relationship. They couldn't be seen leaving together without confirming every accusation I'd made, but they also couldn't support each other through the immediate aftermath of their public humiliation. I stood in the doorway of our house, watching the last guests disappear into the night, surrounded by the debris of a dinner party that had accomplished exactly what I'd intended. The marriage was over, the affair was exposed, and the consequences were just beginning to unfold. For the first time in months, I felt completely honest about who I was, and what I wanted. The woman who desperately sought approval and tried to hold together a marriage that was being destroyed from within was gone. In her place stood someone who understood that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to accept treatment that diminishes your worth. Ryan and Chloe had made their choices, and now they would live with the result. Their perfect romance would have to survive bankruptcy, unemployment, family rejection, and the knowledge that their love story had been built on a foundation of lies and betrayal. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, sometimes it's simply making sure everyone sees the truth. 6 months later, I stood in the conference room of Martinez and Associates, the advertising agency I'd founded after leaving my old job, watching the sun set over downtown Atlanta through floor-to-ceiling windows that reflected my own image back at me. The woman staring back was someone I barely recognized from the person who'd packed for a family reunion the previous summer. This version of myself wore confidence like armor, carried success like a weapon, and had learned that sometimes losing everything you thought you wanted was the only way to discover what you actually needed. The divorce had been finalized 3 months ago with a settlement that exceeded even my attorney's optimistic projections. Georgia's adultery laws, combined with the comprehensive evidence Marcus had gathered, left Ryan with limited negotiating power and significant financial obligation. The house in Virginia Highland was mine, along with the majority of our shared assets and substantial alimony payments that would continue for the next 5 years. More satisfying than the financial victory was the professional vindication. Ryan's law firm had terminated his partnership after the managing partner received my carefully documented evidence of his fraudulent business expansion proposal. The Charlotte satellite office he'd planned as cover for his affair never materialized, and his reputation in Atlanta's legal community suffered damage that would take years to repair, if it ever could be. His attempts to find new employment had been hampered by the reality that legal communities are surprisingly small and gossip travels faster than qualification. Word of his affair with his wife's sister, conducted while using firm resources for fake business development, had spread through professional networks with the kind of efficiency that only comes when a story is both shocking and morally clear-cut. Chloe's professional consequences had been equally swift and thorough. The hospital administration's investigation into her conduct had revealed a pattern of boundary violations and ethical lapses that extended beyond just her affair with Ryan. Her nursing license was suspended pending a formal review, and her employment was terminated with prejudice. The apartment in Charlotte she'd planned to share her new life in remained empty, the lease broken when she could no longer afford the rent. But the most devastating consequence for both of them wasn't financial or professional. It was the complete collapse of their romantic relationship under the weight of real-world pressures they'd never considered while conducting their secret affair. The phone call had come from my mother 2 months after the dinner party, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who'd watched justice unfold naturally. "They broke up," she'd said without preamble. "Chloe and Ryan. It's over." The details, pieced together through family networks and mutual acquaintances, painted a picture of two people who'd discovered that stolen romance couldn't survive public scrutiny and financial stress. Without jobs, without family support, and without the thrill of forbidden love to sustain them, they'd quickly realized they had very little in common beyond mutual selfishness and a shared talent for deception. Ryan had moved back in with his parents in Virginia, a 40-year-old man reduced to living in his childhood bedroom while he searched for employment that would both pay his bills and accept his damaged reputation. The confident attorney who'd once charmed his way through Atlanta's social scene had become a cautionary tale about the dangers of mixing personal desire with professional responsibility. Chloe had fled to California claiming she needed a fresh start somewhere nobody knew her story, but social media and professional networks made geographic escape increasingly difficult, and her attempts to rebuild her nursing career had been complicated by the suspension that followed her everywhere like a digital scarlet letter. Their love story, which had seemed so powerful and undeniable during those secret months, hadn't survived 6 weeks of real-world consequence. The passion that had driven them to destroy marriages and betray families proved insufficient to sustain them through unemployment, bankruptcy, and social exile. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd sacrificed everything for a relationship that turned out to be as shallow and temporary as their commitment to the people they'd betrayed. My own transformation had been far more substantial and lasting. The woman who desperately sought approval from Ryan's family was gone, replaced by someone who understood that respect must be earned through actions rather than demanded through relationships. The wife who'd absorbed insults and suspicious comments without defending herself had evolved into someone who recognized manipulation immediately and responded with appropriate consequence. But perhaps most importantly, I'd learned to trust my own instincts instead of gaslighting myself into accepting treatment that felt wrong. The months of questioning my perceptions about Ryan's behavior had taught me to listen to the inner voice that recognized dishonesty and disrespect, even when it came wrapped in familiar packages. The advertising agency was thriving beyond my wildest projection. Freed from the distraction of a failing marriage and the energy drain of constant deception, I'd thrown myself into building something that belonged entirely to me. The clients who'd followed me from my previous firm had been joined by new accounts drawn to an agency that promised authentic storytelling and genuine innovation. My team of 12 employees occupied the entire floor of a converted warehouse in the Arts District, with exposed brick walls displaying awards we'd won for campaigns that pushed creative boundaries while delivering measurable results. The work was challenging and rewarding in ways that my previous corporate position had never been, partly because I was no longer dividing my emotional energy between career success and marital management. The personal relationships in my life had also undergone dramatic transformation. Friends who'd remained loyal during the divorce had proven themselves worthy of deeper trust, while those who'd suggested I should have tried harder to save my marriage had naturally drifted away. The process had been painful but clarifying, revealing which people genuinely cared about my well-being versus those who simply preferred comfortable social arrangements. My relationship with my parents had strengthened considerably once they'd processed their initial shock about Chloe's betrayal. Mom had initially blamed herself for not recognizing the signs of her younger daughter's deception, but therapy had helped her understand that skillful manipulators are often invisible to the people who love them most. Dad's response had been more straightforward and ultimately more satisfying. He'd cut Chloe off financially and emotionally, making it clear that her choices had consequences that extended far beyond her immediate relationship with Ryan. His support for my decision to expose their affair publicly had never wavered, and his pride in my professional success had helped heal some of the wounds left by family betrayal. The extended family dynamics had shifted in ways that surprised. Aunts, uncles, and cousins who'd witnessed the dinner party revelation had universally sided with me, creating a network of support that had sustained me through the difficult months of divorce proceedings and business development. Even Ryan's parents, after their initial shock and disappointment, had reached out to apologize for their son's behavior and express regret about losing me as a daughter-in-law. The isolation that Ryan and Chloe had expected to impose on me through their betrayal had instead fallen on them, While I'd discovered a community of people who valued honesty and integrity over comfortable lies, dating had been the last frontier of my personal reconstruction, and I'd approached it with the same strategic thinking that had served me well in business. The apps and social events that constituted modern romance were foreign territory for someone who'd been married since her 20s, but they also provided opportunities to practice new relationship skills I'd developed through hard experience. I was no longer interested in men who needed to be convinced of my worth or who viewed relationships as competitions to be won rather than partnerships to be built. The red flags that I'd ignored or rationalized during my marriage with Ryan now triggered immediate responses that prioritized my well-being over social politeness. The man I'd been seeing for the past 2 months was a photographer named David, whose approach to relationships was refreshingly straightforward. He communicated directly about his feelings and expectations, respected my boundaries without testing them, and showed genuine interest in my thoughts and goals rather than viewing me as an accessory to his own life. Most importantly, he understood that my independence wasn't a challenge to be overcome, but a strength to be appreciated. The business I'd built, the friends I'd cultivated, and the life I'd reconstructed weren't obstacles to our relationship but assets that made me a more interesting partner. The difference between dating as a confident, successful woman versus a marriage-focused people-pleaser was striking. Instead of molding myself to fit someone else's expectations, I was attracting people who appreciated my authentic personality and genuine accomplishment. The process was slower but infinitely more satisfying than the desperate approval-seeking that had characterized my early relationship with Ryan. Professional recognition had followed personal growth in ways that validated my decision to prioritize my own development over salvaging a marriage that had been damaged beyond repair. Martinez and Associates had been featured in industry publications as one of the Southeast's most innovative creative agencies, with particular praise for campaigns that managed to be both emotionally resonant and commercially successful. The success felt earned in ways that my previous achievements never had, partly because it was built on a foundation of genuine self-knowledge rather than external validation. I wasn't succeeding to prove anything to people who'd underestimated me. I was succeeding because I'd finally aligned my actions with my actual values and abilities. Standing in that conference room, reviewing the quarterly reports that showed another month of record growth, I found myself thinking about the woman who'd packed for a family reunion 9 months early. She'd been seeking approval from people whose opinions ultimately didn't matter, sacrificing her own instincts to maintain relationships that were already damaged, and accepting treatment that diminished her worth because she was afraid of being alone. The journey from that person to this one hadn't been easy or quick, but it had been absolutely necessary. The dinner party revelation had marked the end of one life and the beginning of another, but the real transformation had happened in the months of rebuilding that followed. I'd learned that betrayal, while devastating, could also be liberating if it forced you to stop accepting less than you deserve. The marriage I'd fought so hard to save had actually been preventing me from becoming the person I was capable of being, constraining my growth within the boundaries of someone else's comfort zone. Ryan and Chloe had done me a favor, though they'd never intended it that way. By destroying the life I thought I wanted, they'd forced me to build the life I actually needed. Their betrayal had been the catalyst for changes I might never have made if I'd continued trying to fix a relationship that was fundamentally broken. The phone buzzed with a text from David, asking if I wanted to grab dinner after my late meeting. The casualness of the invitation, free from hidden agendas or power games, reminded me how different healthy relationships felt compared to the constant negotiation and second-guessing that had characterized my marriage. I was no longer the woman who checked her husband's mood before expressing her own opinions, who apologized for taking up space, or who accepted criticism disguised as helpful suggestion. The transformation was complete not because I'd gotten revenge on the people who'd hurt me, but because I'd finally learned to value myself enough to demand that others do the same. The evening stretched ahead with possibilities that belonged entirely to me. Dinner with someone who appreciated my company, work that challenged and fulfilled me, friends who supported my growth rather than requiring my diminishment, and the quiet satisfaction of a life built on honest foundations rather than comfortable lies. Ryan and Chloe had wanted a love story that transcended ordinary moral boundaries. Instead, they'd created a cautionary tale about the difference between passion and character, between wanting something and deserving it, between the temporary thrill of forbidden romance and the lasting satisfaction of authentic relationship. Their story had ended in predictable collapse,
destroyed by the same selfishness and deception that had created it. Mine was just beginning, built on hard-won wisdom and genuine self-respect that would sustain whatever challenges lay ahead. Sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is the motivation to stop accepting their treatment. Ryan and Chloe had provided that gift, though they'd never intended it as kindness. The woman I'd become was stronger, wiser, and infinitely more valuable than the one they'd betrayed, and that transformation was worth more than any marriage that required me to be less than who I truly was. The dinner party had marked the end of their deception and the beginning of their consequences, but more importantly, it had marked the beginning of my life as someone who finally understood that love without respect is worthless, that family loyalty must be earned through actions rather than demanded through blood, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is refuse to accept treatment that diminishes your worth. I gathered my things and headed toward the elevator, ready for dinner with someone who valued honesty, toward an evening that belonged entirely to me, and into a future that would be built on the solid foundation of self-respect rather than the shifting sands of other people's approval. The transformation was complete, and it had been worth every painful step of the journey. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.